Hi, my name is Benjamin Mays, and thank you for joining me for episode 16 of the Cedar60 Podcast. This week's episode is an interview with Dr. Jeffrey Haymond, Dean of the School of Business here at Cedarville University. Before coming to Cedarville in 2010, Dr. Haymond served as a colonel in the United States Air Force, serving on assignments in engineering, satellite control, and launch operations. He has taught at the Air Force Academy and was an Air Force Fellow at the Brookings Institute. His current research interests include economics and religion, as well as monetary theory. Dr. Haymond has a passion for thinking biblically and economically, and has considered the integration of the Christian worldview in the broader society the most positive social policy possible. Dr. Haymond has a passion for helping the next generation of Christian leaders develop the ability to think critically with a distinctly Christian worldview. And now, here's my interview with Dr. Jeffrey Haymond on socialism and Christianity. Dr. Haymond, thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
To jumpstart the conversation about socialism, Dr. Haymond, something that I think a lot of people understand, but don't always understand why, is why socialism and these more liberal views on economics are popular among young adults. Maybe you could shed some light on why is that?
Sure. I mean, there's a multitude of reasons, so we can just take a few of them to be illustrative. First of all, it's nothing new, right? Socialism, ever since it's been discussed in various forms, and at least for several centuries, has always been attracted to young people, in large part because socialism represents the abstract idea of what is not. And when you look at the world, and Christians especially should be sympathetic to this view for the socialist person that's attracted to socialism, and here's why. Because we recognize we live in a fallen world, and so does everybody else. They look at this world, especially young people, and I think I might have talked to some of our students last semester about this. I labeled that talk "When You Were Young." When you were young and growing up, and you're in your mother and dad's house, and everything's perfect, and then you slowly get used to some of the things you see in the world that just seem to be in a discord with what your dreams were. You see results that don't look like what they should be. And so as young people become teenagers, and then they find out mom and dad somehow aren't Superman and Superwoman and as brainiacs as they thought, then they begin to distrust authority, at least at some level, and think there's got to be a better way. All of us yearn for a better way. And that's very consistent with the Christian worldview. We yearn for when this world will be made right, when Jesus Christ is on his throne. But for most people, they don't realize that's what they're yearning for, of course. God has set eternity in their hearts, yet they don't know what that's all about. So the idea that they're attracted to some abstract idea of fairness, justice, all that, we should applaud. That's intrinsic to what it means to be human. We can start there. Then we can start thinking about, I love a way that Friedrich Hayek talked about it. In his book, and this is kind of an outgrowth of his Nobel Prize lecture, he called socialism the fatal conceit. And in a book that he wrote late in life, actually published when he was like 88, just shows what a mind he still had at the end of his life. He made a difference between kind of and I forget the first term, but the further term was the extended order. And basically it goes like this. We have a lot of relationships where socialism is in play all the time, in those close-knit family relationships where we know who people are. We would never think of charging a price to our mom for cleaning up our clothes or anything like that, nor would she charge us for dinner or something like that. I never charge my wife when I change the oil in her car. That's just not the way we think we love one another. We just do for one another. And so there's a natural yearning to have that kind of tightness and connectedness to a broader group of people. But this is what Hayek calls the extended order. And what we can do in the family or the tribe or something like that is completely different for when we interface with people we do not even know. And that's where kind of markets tend to emerge, because there's many economic things, principally we call it the knowledge problem, but we don't have an understanding of what they need, and and how to do it, and nor do we have the ability to have that kind of deep connection to very many people. For instance, I've seen some recommendations, and I don't know this to be true. This isn't part of my research, but like even a church, we talk about ideal size of church, and there's some number, like you can know like 120 people closely or something. There's a limit, right? And that's a part of our being finite. God is infinite, but we are finite. So when we start thinking of how we would relate to people, in this extended order, the relationships that we can do in our family just don't work in an extended order, because people are going to take advantage of each other when they don't know each other, and it just doesn't work out. And that's what Hayek often called the fatal conceit, is this idea of trying to transfer what cannot be done except in a limited way with smaller, close-knit groups to this extended order. So that's, excuse me, at least part of the reason why people are attracted to socialism. It's this idea that there's something better that we would like to have, and that doesn't reflect the fact that we live in a fallen world. Hey, and the good news for our socialist friends is they will get their utopia. We promise, when Jesus comes again. But it's really not until that time.
No, you said that very well, especially in regard to the family being that example of a perfect unit where everything is ideal, the ideal conditions. But when you take a step back and you look at government and systems of markets and the economy, it doesn't work. You try to implement socialism. I want to go a little broader, and for the sake of time, I think it's important for our listeners to hear this. Is people often take socialism and communism, and they don't understand there's a difference. But there's a correlation. So could we talk a little bit about what are the differences? What are the correlations? Is it that slippery slope? How does that actually work?
Yeah. So socialism is one of those things, because it's so abstract. It can mean so many things to so many people, and you get to choose. When we ask anybody about socialism, it's going to mean probably something a little bit different. So the predominant sense in which we talk about socialism in our economy today, in our country, and indeed around the world, most people that are advocating that are not advocating for socialism per se. They just want a much more heavy redistributionist welfare state. They want things to be fair and more people to have more stuff equally, and that kind of thing. Nobody wants to have the government providing their Netflix. They don't think that they want the government to do that. They don't think they want the government running Amazon. They kind of like that next day package delivery. What they do want is to make sure Jeff Bezos, when he gives that package to you in the day, has to give a whole bunch of that money away back to other people that they care about. So that's not quite the same as socialism. Socialism technically is simply the state owning the means of production, directing capital allocation. Now, that being said, there, as you mentioned, there is kind of this linkage to it, because what happens is many people go beyond the state of just a heavy redistribution of state. So for instance, a lot of people would point to Northern Europe, for instance, as a model, and we want socialism. The Swedish people would say, hey, don't call us socialists. We're not socialists. They just have a big welfare state. And in many respects, as I talked to students last year, Sweden is in many respects freer than America. So for instance, they have much more freedom in education. They kind of have a voucher program. They go to school wherever they want, and it's a lot more customer centric. That being said, they pay higher taxes, and you can it's much easier to have the government provide your needs in various ways, whether it be the healthcare system, which they have the healthcare system universal, but at the same point, they have a lot of freedom in going to private doctors through that. So it's kind of a mix. Where we go further is when we start advocating more of the government directing the allocation of capital, what I call the soft fascism, and that's what we increasingly have in the political sector. So for instance, when Joe Biden is elected, and on day one he issues an executive order to cancel the Keystone Pipeline, that's soft fascism, because he is directing the allocation of capital. He's forbidding by edict the allocation of private capital, where private capital would take the investment to. And furthermore, he's now going to be in the process of rewarding more green energy. He wants allocation of capital in this area. And as we know, a lot of socialists, modern socialists of this type, do not want to have pure socialism, because pure socialism, you end up with the model of UK, then you're held accountable. I mean, when it doesn't work and you are the provider, you're to blame. Whereas the beauty of modern, quote, socialism is simply that they do not have to, they're not held accountable when it doesn't go right. They can just say business didn't do what we told them to, and they can throw more regulation and so forth. So that's kind of some of the difference today that we have.
That's very well said. I have to mention it just because it just broke today. President Biden just signed the, I believe, $1.9 trillion relief package for COVID and other things. A lot of Republicans are now launching attacks at Democrats, saying this is another step towards government-run assistance. It's a step too far. It's going to hurt the national debt. And of course, Democrats claim that's not the case, and Republicans constantly are accusing Democrats of moving towards that socialist type of government-run economy. But there is, over time in America, a growing expectation for our government to provide for people, to help people out. It's not a question of should the government, now it's a question of how much should the government intervene in people's lives. But as Christians, we believe that people should be helped. But today you do have, and for a while now, you've had Christians who have advocated for more socialist policies using scripture. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think those Christians are applying kind of the goals of the Christian faith in terms of the outcomes, in terms of care for other people who create in the image of God. They have that value, but they're confusing kind of the means and ends kind of situation. We might want that end, but then the question about it is the means. As in a way, I challenge, even in kind of my introductory economics textbook, I hit this. You know, we really need to come to grips as Christians with the idea that we have a sovereign God who is omnipotent and is all loving. Once we start thinking about the implications of that, we know that right now God on his throne has he's all powerful. He can immediately blink everybody a new car, new house, color TV, on the beach, plenty of food in the fridge. It would be like never-ending fridge. You just keep it. He could do that, and it's at a blink of his eye. It's that easy, and you know, just as easy as manna from heaven. And he does not. Furthermore, we know he's all loving, and yet he does not. And we know there are people that are hungry, and he does not do this. And so we have to question why. I mean, this is kind of the problem of evil in the world, a much bigger theological problem, but it relates to this issue very much. Is why would God allow these things that we won't like in our world? And the answer that I've come to the conclusion of, which I believe is the only acceptable answer for a Christian, is that God allows the suffering of this world precisely so that we may become the hands and feet of God in the world, to care for people, and in the process of doing this, we become more conformed to the image of his Son. As we act like him, we will become like him. It's a little bit of virtue ethics, but sanctification kind of fits into that mold. And likewise, it's very important. We create in our own hearts the hearts of Hesed, or this merciful heart, this loving heart, as we look upon people and care for them, when we don't have to. If it's a matter of justice, we don't cultivate hearts of mercy. We simply need to comply and give people whatever they want, right? If it's a matter of justice, which is an interesting reason why you always see those calling for justice for the poor. They will disdain the word mercy, which I believe is the appropriate word. And so we need to cultivate, those that have more affluent standing need to cultivate hearts of mercy and compassion. Our Father has a heart of mercy and compassion. And likewise, for those that are the recipient of this, they need to cultivate hearts of gratitude and thankfulness. We need to have that, and both of us need to grow in that capacity. Whereas if it's a matter of justice, we don't cultivate that heart of mercy and compassion, nor if it's a matter of justice, we have an obligation and it's a right, and therefore there's no need for them to be grateful. We're just doing what we ought to do. I don't believe for a moment that that's God's plan. I don't see that in the Bible. So I think they're mistaken because I think they're thinking more about trying to make this world a better place, which we should, and they're missing what God's plan to make eternity filled with people more like his son. And so that's kind of the big picture for me. I think they're missing what God's up to, and they're thinking it's on them to meet those people's needs, when instead God is inviting them to join him in the task. And then the question is, how would this be done? So
those two things, yes, those two things, the sovereignty of God and also the gratitude. It reminds me of Romans 1. Their hearts became ungrateful. And at that point, everything goes downhill from there, especially if you're in government. One last question here is the $1 million question. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you've been asked this 100,000 times, but as an American, we constantly hear America is becoming more socialist. So what do you think? Do you think America will eventually become a socialist nation? Or do you think we'll kind of have that battle back and forth of the way things are now, capitalism versus socialism? How do you foresee the next several decades in American economics?
I honestly, it's going to, I think, parallel the religious faith of our country. Mm-hmm. I think that if we continue the spiritual decline we're on, someone or something is going to be your God, and the only question is what. And something or someone external you will place your trust in. The only question is what. And as our country becomes increasingly unwilling to put their trust in God, then they're going to put their trust in an all-powerful state. So, you know, in the Psalms we're told, I look to the hills and from whence does my help come? My help comes from the Lord. But that's not what the modern secularist thinks. I look to the hills and whence does my help come from? Washington, D.C. will send me a stimulus check. And you know, it's kind of ironic. There are people in our country who for various cultural reasons say, I don't want to depend on any one person, but they're then saying, but I'm happy to depend on them by having the state intercede and take from them. So it's interesting. I think that clearly, if trends continue, it's going worse. In fact, you know, we're on a decidedly negative trend. But here's my encouragement. Number one, trends almost never just go straight downhill. I mean, pendulums always seem to there's always a backlash. You know, we could be at the very end and Jesus is going to come tomorrow and we're just going to keep crashing and burning until he comes. I mean, that could be what's happening for sure. But it may not be. I mean, Jesus Christ may not come for 500 or 1,000 or who knows, 10,000 more. We don't know when he's going to come. If he's not coming for a while, should the Lord tarry. It's doubtful to me that we will not have a reaction to this, but the trend is definitely against us. And it's precisely because people are unwilling to think biblically. And whatever you think of the civil religion we had of Christianity, 50 years ago, the Christian worldview was apparent for even the biggest pagan in the culture, such that they wouldn't think about, hey, the government is who I can't wait to get a check from. And now I wrote about this on my blog just yesterday. Now we're sending checks to people who don't even need money. It's the most crazy thing you've ever heard.
I believe inmates were even included.
Yeah. I mean, that's I'm less wild about that, although that's a reason to be concerned, than I am the general cultural decay that thinks it's okay that I should get a check.
Yeah.
I should not get any check. I haven't had a single paycheck cut in this process. It's bad economics. It's bad everything. And as I wrote on the blog the other day, this stimulus thing that they just did, our national debt is going up by almost about 7%. One bill is going to add 7% to our national debt. This is going to be there is a day of reckoning there, and that's a totally different subject on the national debt. But what we can be quite assured of is this COVID and this reaction, and the Democrats are just getting warmed up on that. They're talking about a big stimulus bill, big infrastructure bill now. Mm-hmm. And on top of the $1 trillion, we're running annual deficits, and it's crazy. So yeah, I'm not sanguine about the future. Bottom line.
Well, you certainly could just spend hours on this discussing it, and it's such an important topic. We like to give our guests here on the podcast the last 60 seconds to wrap up their thoughts or any additional thoughts on the topic of the day. So, Dr. Haymond, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I would like to finish up with a quote from my late great professor, Walter Williams. His famous quote was, to have truly compassionate policy requires dispassionate analysis. In other words, if you're going to do the thing that's best for people, you need to really think through, what you're doing. And so when we think about the goals of socialism, we need to dispassionately look at kind of the outcome of every attempt and find out the utter disaster it wreaks on others. And there's a large amount of hubris, especially among young people. So as many of our Cedar listeners are young people, the hubris of thinking you have got this all figured out, and that generations from millennia past, they know nothing. That's kind of crazy. The wisdom of the ages is still the wisdom of the ages. It's not perfect wisdom, and every generation needs to make that combined wisdom better. But to utterly reject, and this goes, from socialism, which every generation does, to the latest craziness of even the last, say, 6 or 7 years, that all of a sudden thinks that you can say if you're a male, you're a female. And we'll just utterly reject all biology, all science, all everything. And what all cultures, of course, all time have thought, we know so much better than those unenlightened troglodytes. And it's just kind of, it's a little bit of hubris that causes great harm. To reject the wisdom of the ages is to invite fantastic harm for lots of reasons. And socialism is just one manifestation of that.
I think our culture could certainly benefit from reading the book of Proverbs.
Yeah.
Dr. Haymond, yes. Dr. Haymond, thank you so much for your time and joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks for interviewing me.
Absolutely.
Hi there, YouTube. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Cedar60. If you enjoy exploring politics from a distinctly Christian perspective, please like this video, comment below about what you've learned, and share it with a friend. If you'd like to be notified about future episodes, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow Cedar60 on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, or look for our episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much.